A tremendous loss for the NYPD and for the city of New York.
A sea of blue. Fellow officers, friends, family, many admirers have shown up to bid a final farewell to the man who came to symbolize courage, faith, and forgiveness.
Detective Steven McDonald.
The detective lived an extraordinary life.
McDonald was the young patrolman shot 3 times in 1986 by a teenager who was stealing a bike in Central Park.
He forgave the teenager who shot him and then made it his life's mission for the past 30 years to promote peace.
He went on to live a life that celebrated the triumph of the human spirit.
Steven was one of the most remarkable men I've ever met and one of the most fearless cops to ever don a uniform. Steven continues to be an icon. He believed that tragedy that befell him was something that happened to him for a reason, to inspire him, to inspire others, so that he could become a messenger.
Steven McDonald grew up in Rockville Center, the son of a New York City police sergeant. When Steven told his fiancée, Patty Ann, that he wanted to be a cop, she was anxious, but out of love, she accepted his decision. Just 2 years after joining the force, Officer McDonald was on patrol in Central Park when he came upon 3 young bicycle thieves, and his life was forever changed.
I looked up and I was staring down the barrel. I watched the barrel of the firearm erupt.
I knew that I was dying, and I could hear my partner yelling for a 10-13 as I was dying. Life was leaving me. That's a very real feeling. I've heard other people talk about it. I knew that's what was happening. I said a quick prayer, and I closed my eyes. I'm told that my partner came to me. He had a decision to make very quickly. Chased the boys to stay with Steven, and he stayed with me, held me in his arms. He was covered in my blood. He was rocking back and forth, crying. He was very upset.
My job was to survive 1 minute to 1 hour to the next day. Patty Ann has a beautiful faith, childlike faith. And were it not for her faith, I don't know if we'd be married still or if I'd be alive.
I think that the major reason for his being able to do what he's done is his own personal strength of character.
Believe me, I was terribly injured, wanting to live one day and very much wanting to die the next. And all of that was overcome. The darkness, the hopelessness, the anger. Bitterness by God's love, His Son's forgiveness, and I did the best around Conor's birth. That following January to tell everyone that I forgave the boy who shot me, and
At the baptism of their son Connor, Patty Ann read a statement on her husband's behalf. It said that he forgave his shooter. I hope that he can find peace and purpose in his life, Steven said. With his family, Steven McDonald began to appear at police stations, schools, and public events to spread a message of reconciliation. Between 1997 and the year 2000, he also made 3 trips to Northern Ireland to spread his message of peace.
My aim is to inspire a few hearts, help the healing process. So many people helped me when I was shot and left for dead, and came to the decision to forgive the person who tried to murder me, to move on with my life. So I'm here to do the same for the people of this assembly and of Northern Ireland.
Can I just share with you a little bit about another saint? I don't use this word frivolously, and that's Detective Steven McDonald. There wasn't the bedside of a wounded policeman where you would not find him in his wheelchair. There was not the home of a grieving family that had lost a son, a husband, a wife, or a daughter in the line of duty where Detective McDonald could not be found consoling them. There's probably not been a school in this archdiocese where he hasn't visited. There's not a prison in this state where he's not invited to speak about reconciliation and forgiveness, and he became a renowned figure in this New York community.
I have just very strong feelings about life issues and values, and they've been shaped by my life
experienced, certainly when I was shot and left for dead in Central Park, what I've learned about life and my relationship with God, all of that comes together.
At the root of all of it, everybody, of this courageous person, was by his own testimony, a deep and fervent Catholic faith.
Under circumstances that would have been crushing to most, Steven McDonald had become a messenger of hope, love, and reconciliation. He was the living evidence of an impossible unity. In 2016, Steven looked on proudly as his son Conor was promoted to New York City Police Detective. Like his father, Conor had chosen to serve.
My dad wanted to make sure his time on earth was not wasted. That is why he was so passionate in spreading God's message of love, compassion, and forgiveness. My father forgave the young man who shot him every single day. He made it his mission to have all us realize that love must win.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the New York Encounter. I have with me Sergeant Conor McDonald, the son of Stephen and Patty McDonald. Conor grew up on Long Island. He attended and graduated from Chaminade High School, and then went on to Boston College. Upon graduating from Boston College, he volunteered in a youth...
Vincentians, with the Vincentians out in Denver.
With the Vincentians for about 10 months, right? A year?
Yes, sir.
Close to that. And right after that, he joined the New York City Police Department. In 2016, he was promoted to detective. That was in January, I think. And in September, he was promoted to sergeant. I met Conor right around the Thanksgiving holiday. My dear friend Angelo Sala asked me to accompany him, and we met with Conor. And then we met again. And after leaving that night, I felt that I had made a new friend, I hope, a lasting friendship. And last Thursday night, was it Thursday night?
Yeah, Thursday night, yeah.
We met again for the anniversary. Huh?
The Rangers were playing that night.
The anniversary, a memorial mass for his father out in Rockville Center. And it was a beautiful mass. I had come from Staten Island, and when I got there, there was so many people. I could not believe the amount of people that were there, and I was stunned by the extent of affection that they had for this man, and that's really about it. I'd like to turn it over to Conor because he has a very dramatic and powerful story to tell us all.
Thank you, John. Thank you. I want to thank everyone for giving me the opportunity to speak tonight, and John and Angelo. Around this time last year, my father was supposed to speak. And unfortunately, as some of you may know, he passed on from complications due to being injured so long ago in 1986. So Angelo and John contacted me over the last 6 to 8 months, and they asked me if I would speak tonight. And I thought it would be pretty good for me to spread my dad's story, especially around the 1-year anniversary that he passed on. So I want to thank you all very much for giving me the opportunity. I'm extremely humbled being here, and I hope I can do my best to spread my father's amazing story. It's a different story compared to a lot of stories out there, and I think it's a story that no matter where you come from and what you believe and how you feel about things, I think it's good for all of us to know it and be inspired by it. I also want to thank my family for being here. My dad's partner, Detective Andy Sereni, my mother, the mayor of Malvern, Long Island, Patty Ann McDonald, and the love of my life, my fiance, Katie Sullivan. So extremely lucky, and I see a lot of guys in uniform, my blue family. Thank you very much for coming and supporting my father and my family. My story starts about 6 months before I was born. My father was a veteran of the Navy. He was a Navy corpsman. The slang word for them were docs. They were the medics for the Marines, and he was a Navy corpsman from 1976 to 1980. And he believed in service. He believed in helping another human being, and he followed my great-grandfather, my grandfather, and my great-uncle into what I believe is the greatest police department in the world, the New York City Police Department. During the time, he met my mother and courted her for a couple of years, and they were married in November of 1985. My dad joined the police department in July 1984. So when July 12th of 1986 rolled around, it was just a normal rainy mid-afternoon. Back in the day, I know we can picture New York right now, and it's a beautiful place. You're not really worried about walking down the neighborhoods, getting mugged and fearing for your life, and especially Central Park, where my father worked. People believe and they have a right to roam around Central Park without the fear of being robbed or sexually assaulted. But unfortunately, in the year 1986, there were a lot of heinous crimes going on. And the particular crime my father was trying to prevent was gunpoint robberies of bikes, young teenage kids robbing other young teenage kids with guns. And there was probably about 15 each month in July of 1986. In parts of the park where now beautiful and people can roam free and not worry about guns. And this particular pattern was happening on the east side near Harlem, 108th Street and 5th Avenue. And my father knew exactly where the individuals were going to be that day by reading complaints that happened before July 12th. And he was an anti-crime, meaning he was a plainclothes cop, just like you guys. He wore jeans, a nice shirt, and tried to kind of fit into the general population of New York City. Him and his partner, Pete King, were starting a 4-by, which was a 3:30 p.m. till around 11:30, 12 o'clock at night. And my dad and Pete rode up to 108th Street near Fifth Avenue inside the park. And by the time they rolled around the bend near Lasker Pond, where the pool is, where there's also a skating rink, my father saw the 3 individuals, young boys, 12, 13, and 15, and they fit the pattern of what was going on that day. Also at that time, my father saw a young boy, had nothing to do with the 3 individuals, who was riding a bike. And my dad saw the 3 individuals kind of corralling the one boy on the bike. So my dad and his partner knew they were suspicious of a crime afoot, a felony crime, robbery. they went ahead and they stopped the car, and the three boys saw my dad and Pete jump out, and they ran. And that's when my dad ran after him, and Pete tried to cut him off one way. So my dad went down the hill, and Pete went the other way. And my father was the first one to catch the boys. And they were young boys. They were 12, 13, 15. And you wouldn't suspect a heinous crime coming from a 12, or 13, or 15-year-old kids. But unfortunately, you can't really assume in our positions as cops sometimes. And my father felt, he could talk to them and explain to them that there was a better route than the route they were taking. So he approached them, identified himself as a police officer, never took out his gun, even though he knew that it was, he had the right authority to take out his gun, even because of gunpoint robberies, but he never took out his gun, and he just approached them like he wanted to talk to them, talk it out, diffuse the situation. My dad, as a rookie cop in the Lower East Side, they called him Father Steven. And that was my dad. He just wanted to talk it out. And unfortunately, that split second where he gave the benefit of the doubt to the young boys who were criminals, Shavard Jones, the 15-year-old, took advantage of it. And my dad thought he saw a gun in the youngest boy's sock. And when he reached down, Shavard Jones took out his gun out of his waistband and pushed my dad down, and then shot my dad in the neck, and then stood over him again and shot him point blank in the head when my dad was laying down in the ground. And again, he shot him in the arm. And this all happened when my dad's partner, Pete King, was running towards my dad. So unfortunately, my dad's partner, who was extremely traumatized from that, saw the whole thing unfold and couldn't really react. He ran after the boys, couldn't get them, ran back to my dad, and as cops, when you're in a really bad situation, you call it 1013, and his partner called it 1013, and they got him to Metropolitan Hospital, which is up in Harlem, near 116 on the east side, and there, they didn't know whether or not they could save my dad's life in Metropolitan. So we were lucky. It was an angel, as my dad would call it. When a lot of bigwigs were discussing how they would have to bring the family to Metropolitan and tell them to say goodbye to my dad, there was a detective at the time, Brian Mulheron, who my father always says is his hero. And Brian told everybody, we gotta get a second opinion. This cop's not gonna die, and we gotta get him somewhere else. And they got my dad to Bellevue Hospital, where they sustained his life. But unfortunately, the bullets that Shavard shot, the one bullet to the neck, paralyzed my dad. And it was a vertebrae so high that my dad wouldn't be able to breathe on his own, move his hands, move his feet. Pretty much my dad was going to be incapacitated for the rest of his life. And he was a good-looking man. He was full of life. He was a great athlete. He did everything by the book, and for that to happen was life-altering, was life-shattering. But he spent a couple of months in Bellevue from July until April of '87. And at that time, the two main motivators of my dad was my mother and my dad's mother, Anita, and they both had unshakable faith. And we were lucky enough that Mayor Koch was the mayor at the time, and he knew Cardinal O'Connor. So Cardinal O'Connor made sure there was mass every day at my dad's bedside. And every day, everyone knew to come at a certain time after work, and there was going to be mass no matter what. And one particular time, the fire chaplain and the police chaplain couldn't make it. So the fire chaplain, Father Julian Deacon, called a friend who just got back from Rome from sabbatical. And it was Father Michael Judge. Father Michael Judge was killed in 9/11 in World Trade Centers. He was the Franciscan friar who became later on the chaplain of the fire department. And it was funny, Father Mike would always tell the story when he came back from Rome, the first call he got was from Father Julian Deacon. He's like, I need you to go to Bellevue and go say Mass for the McDonalds. And Father Mike just got off the plane. There's no social media, no email. And Father Mike's, he's like, who's Steven McDonald? And he said, Father Julian Deacon's like, where you been? He's like, I've been in Rome. He's like, well, you'll figure it out when you get down there. Just get down there and say Mass. So if I'm not sure if anyone knew Father Michael Judge, but Father Michael Judge was a remarkable human being. And he did two things that time in my dad's hospital bed that kind of inspired my father. He prayed a prayer that became a family prayer to us, the St. Francis Peace Prayer. And when Father Mike said that after Mass, my dad said, Father Mike, what is that? He mouthed it. He couldn't talk yet. He said, what is that? He said, and Father Mike said, it's the peace prayer of St. Francis. And my father, if you know the peace prayer, it's very prophetic of my dad's life. And my dad said when Father Mike said that prayer, he knew what he had to do from his condition of being a quadriplegic. And it was also, I think, Father Mike, as my mother and my grandmother would say, they put a Eucharist on my father's head. And people who always at the bed said they felt at that time when they put the Eucharist on my father's head, because he could not receive, that my father was inspired by Jesus Christ. Now, that's not the major story. I know, he was injured and he was tragically assaulted and paralyzed, but my dad didn't let that define his marriage or his life. And when I was born on January 29th of 1987, my father always said it was kind of like a new hope. He felt, he knew that he figured out his purpose to be a great father to me and a great husband to my mother. And he thought about it for a long while, and he felt that he had to forgive the young boy that shot him. Now, back in the day in New York, if you know New York back in the day, if you know your history about New York, especially the 70s, 80s, and the early 90s, it was a tumultuous time, and there was a lot of anger, hostility, division on both sides of the spectrum. And my father felt that his injury and his story about what happened to him, that he could help heal the city and hopefully make the world a better place. So through a friend, he wrote a speech, and my father still could not talk because he was still breathing on the ventilator and learning how to breathe on a ventilator. So he asked my mom to read it, and next to Cardinal Connor, my mother told the city and the world that my father forgave the young boy that shot him and hoped that he finds purpose in his life. Now, a lot of people have come up and talked to me and asked me, was it for real? Did he really forgive this young boy, and did he really mean what he meant? And my whole life, my dad did a great job of protecting, the pain that protecting me from the pain that he suffered. Living life as a quadriplegic is no way you want to live life. Everything is done for you. Breathing is done for you. You have to be suctioned because you're unable to garner the mucus in your lungs and your throat. So you have to be suctioned there. You have to be helped to go to the bathroom, shower. If you have an itch, you need someone to itch your nose, itch your eye, eat, drink. Everything you possibly can imagine that you do on a given day, my dad needed help constantly. That's why he had 24/7 nurses. And my mother would tell a story that my dad went out to Denver for rehab, probably one of the best medical facilities for quadriplegics in the world, Craig Hospital. And they said, Patty Ann, sit on the chair. My mom sat on the chair, and she moved for like 2 minutes. And they said, Patty Ann, you can't move. You know, and my mom got so frustrated, and then she realized, you know, Steven has to do with this, and this was only the first 2 years of my dad's life. And my dad lived like this for 30 and a half years. 30 and a half years. When he got back from Craig Hospital, he went from April to 87 to November 87. He got home, and everyone knew who he was. He'd go around just from, you know, event to event, and they would say, "Hey, Steve, this and that," and you know, it was a nice life for a quadriplegic, but my dad felt that he wanted to do more, and he didn't know what, because he was always at home, and my mother told him, "Listen, you gotta get out of the house. There's way too many people in the house. We need something. You need to do something. Even though we're in that chair, you have to figure something out." And that's where my mother inspired my dad, and that's where he started, as Cardinal Dolan said, he started going around and preaching his story of his faith, his love, and his forgiveness, especially the young boy that shot him. And my father went around the whole entire world. And like I said, people asked me, was he for real for what he meant? And he was 100% totally committed to his message of love and forgiveness. Yeah.
I just want to say something, you know, because he brings up a point that, you know, people question, you know, is this, you know, for real? And I read in his story, this book that I bought, I got it on Amazon, and when Steven was shot, the mayor went to the hospital, and he called Cardinal O'Connor, and when he called Cardinal O'Connor, he asked him to come to the hospital because he saw something in this family, these people, that required him to be there. The Cardinal came over within minutes. I just want to read something real quick. I know that we're running out of time here, but anyway, what I want to point out is I don't have time to read it. What I want to point out is that Cardinal O'Connor saw on Christmas Eve, he mentions it on Christmas Eve, that the faith, I have to bring it out. No, you have to. You'll have to wait a few minutes. All right. This is what he says in his homily on Christmas Eve. This is 1986. My top religious news story of 1986 is in Bellevue Hospital. This very moment, police officer Steven McDonald has been lying on a hospital bed now for more than 5 months with his bride of 13 months, constantly at his side, always encouraging him, always praying with him. He asks, what makes this news? Many police officers have been shot. It's almost as if all the world's suffering can be summed up and placed in that hospital bed with Steven McDonald. Not for one single instant has their simple childlike faith faltered. Time after time, their doctors have told them that humanly there is no hope. Medically, there can be no progress. Time after time, Steven and Patty Ann have insisted that a miracle will take place. To me, this is the miracle. This is the meaning of Christmas. That's faith. That's a simple faith. That's a childlike faith. Theologians, medical doctors, scientists, historians, scripture scholars may all know better, but Steven and Patty Ann will live every day in hope. They will accept what they see as the permissive will of God when so many understandably would be shaking their fist at God, threatening God, hating God. They have accepted what God has permitted to happen with no bitterness, no rancor towards the assailant, no resentment, no cries of revenge. Now, how can you do that without faith? It's as remarkable as any faith I have ever seen. Our theme is an impossible unity. No.
And that's what my father, and that's when my father lived for 30 and a half years. And I can tell you, it's not easy. Like I said, witnessing what my father went through, what my mother sacrificed, what my family sacrificed, to see a man like that, and he always said, you know, Connor, when we used to have arguments, do not let anger destroy your heart. You always must let love win. And he believed it. And the one thing that he always told me, and he believed it as well, was to pray. And telling a young guy growing up in this society, social media, TV, it's tough to, especially sports nonstop, it's tough to sit down and say the rosary, especially when your dad wants to say it every 5 minutes, you know? And, but, so, I've been trying to challenge myself the last year. My father, he passed away from respiratory failure, being on a ventilator for 30 and a half years. Unfortunately, it was July 6th, and my mother, he was at home in bed, and no alarms went off. And January 6th, I apologize, January 6th, I get that confused. January 6th, and no alarms went off, and he just stopped breathing, and it was like he went to bed. And the nurse was watching him, but he just went blue. And my mother was there, and my mother had to witness that. And it's very hard to reconcile that. But I try to take faith in everything he said. I tell people that I love my dad, I knew how important he was, but maybe I didn't fully appreciate his presence. And now I do. And I think it's important in today's society for my father's message, no matter where you go, no matter who you see, no matter who you argue, no matter what you disagree with, I think we have to have, as my father always said, believe in the dignity of human beings. And that's what my dad saw. Even if it was a young boy from a totally different background, a different skin color, maybe a different religion, my dad did not care. He totally believed in forgiving the young boy and knowing that that young boy was special. And that's what he wanted to convey. It's an impossible unity, some people might say. But I'll tell you what, my father did not believe in impossibility. He believed that we should all come together no matter what your differences were. And the other day, we had Mass on his anniversary. January 10th is the day he passed. And I've never seen a church packed like that in my entire life. Outside Christmas and Easter, on a weekday, the church was packed. It was packed with the rosary, and it was packed for Mass. And I got extremely emotional because, like I said, I've been in a really hard time right now, him not being here. And that gave me faith. And I understood how important his message is to forgive and never let anger destroy your heart and to love one another. And my dad always believed in the message of Jesus Christ. And that's what my dad believed in. Trust me, it's very hard. It's not easy. My dad made it look easy. You know, my mother and I could testify that it's extremely tough sometimes to grin and bear it. But to make this world a better place, I think my father, and like many people before him, preaching forgiveness and love, I think it's a way to bring the impossible unity as a real thing. So I want to thank you all so much for being here and giving me the time to talk, and for John being here and letting me talk. But I hope when you do leave here and able to read more about my dad, wherever you're from, wherever you go, please just spread his message, because I think in modern day society, it's an extremely important message. And no matter, because you might not agree with me with certain things, but I tell you what, we'll agree on one thing, how important everybody is in this room and in this world. And that was my father's real message. So thank you all so much for giving me the time to talk. Even though I don't know you, I love you. And Happy New Year, and God bless.
Thank you, Connor, for sharing. Thank you, John. And good evening, everybody, and welcome to New York Encounter number 10. It's been 10 years. Well, "10 years and we're still kicking," sort of. Or, we could put it, like Bob Dylan would put it, and say that, I was so much older then, I'm younger than that now. At least you try to comfort yourself by singing that song. But what keeps you young, what keeps us young, and what keeps the encounter alive is the questions. They keep us searching, they keep our eyes open, our ears open, and our hearts open. And the bigger the questions, the bigger the answers. And so we look at this year's theme, an impossible unity, as a big question that we will help each other to tackle through this weekend. How can we come to love the others? How can we come to have compassion for others? How can we come to an experience of unity in which our need for companionship is satisfied? Companionship belongs to the essence of what is, to the mystery of which all things are made. How can one say you and therefore say I? How is it possible to become one with others? This is just a hint, just an invitation to a possible journey. That's why we do exist as New York Encounter. That's why we put all of ourselves into this adventure. Now I would like to invite His Excellency Archbishop Auza, who is the permanent observer of the Holy See to the United Nations, to share with us the message we received from the Holy Father. Archbishop.
Dear friends, good evening. Before I read the message of the Holy Father for this year's New York Encounter, I would like to convey to you my joy and my best wishes for this year's encounter. In my role representing the Holy See at the United Nations, I witness every day the consequences that flow from the personal, familial, social, national, and international fragmentation that are creating deeper divisions in hearts, in homes, and in countries. At the same time that our world is becoming increasingly interconnected, the sin that attacks within and divides without has led to a situation with 59 cross-border or civil wars taking place even as we speak. Increasing xenophobia with regard to refugees and migrants, political polarization that fractures national solidarity, and even deep divisions among those who believe in God and seek to do His will. The United Nations is certainly a place in which most desire to be, live, and work united, but that aspiration, I believe, is still far from being completely achieved. Yet at the same time, as we note with somber sincerity the disunity that plagues our planet, Christians turn with confident hope to the prayer made by Jesus in the vigil of the day on which his garments were divided among soldiers and his blood separated from his body on Calvary. During the Last Supper, Jesus prayed to his Father, begging for unity, for a loving communion resembling and participating in the very communion of persons whom Christians profess is God. And we believe that Jesus' prayer was not in vain. Unity is not impossible, although it is among the most challenging tasks presented to every generation, not only to ours. It is the consequence of decisions that lead to communion and say no to the selfishness that divides. It is the fruit of divine help and human cooperation. And encounters like this, which are a concrete manifestation of the culture of encounter, to which Pope Francis is always summoning us to participate in and promote, are certainly a firm step in the direction of making such an arduous but blessed unity possible. I therefore congratulate all of you on seeking to become architects of that union through your presence here at this year's New York Encounter. Before I share with you the words and prayers of the Holy Father, I would like to thank Connor and Patty Ann, and above all, Steve, for that witnessing, for that testimony, for that concrete example that unity indeed within and without is possible. These are the words that the Holy Father addresses to this year's encounter. In a letter signed by Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Holy See's Secretary of State, I read, His Holiness Pope Francis offers good wishes to all gathered for the New York Encounter sponsored by Communion and Liberation. He prays that these days of conversation may assist participants in deepening their desire for truth, beauty, and justice, and in promoting a greater solidarity among people in the pursuit of these divine gifts. In this way, this meeting will bear fruit that endures and make a true and lasting contribution to the unity of local communities. Upon all present, His Holiness invokes the divine blessings of wisdom, strength, and peace. End of the message. So I wish you all once again that this encounter will be enriching for all its participants. Thank you and good evening.
Thank you.